What's up, everybody? Welcome in to the very first edition of the By the Horns podcast presented by Toyota. And I always remember that Toyota has more all-wheel drive and four-wheel drive vehicles than any other brand. You can find yours and shine on. Toyota, let's go places. I'm Cam Smith, your host, and I'm joined by my co-host, Drew Stevens of The Bigs. And look, Drew, we're going to have a fantastic time, a lot of fun, and a lot of real talk when it comes to the By the Horns podcast, man. So I know a lot of people tuning in are curious to know more about us, but I'm just going to let this be known right now that we are true Chicagoans. So you got a West Sider and myself, and you got a South Sider and Drew Stevenson combining and joining together to represent the city and show some love to the Chicago Bulls, man. So Drew, how you feeling?
Cam, I'm here with you. We talking about the Bulls, man. I'm in heaven right now, brother. Like, it's no better place to be, man.
No doubt, no doubt. And speaking of heaven, man, the Bulls have made heaven in so many different ways in terms of what this franchise has been, especially during the time that we were coming up, right? Early 90s, mid 90s, all of that, the dominant decade that the Bulls had for the Jordan years, the Pippen outbursts, all those different things for this franchise stand out in so many different ways. So as I mentioned, I'm from the west side of Chicago, man, played my high school basketball at Gordon Tech High School. Actually, let me run it back for my real Chicagoans out there that are tapped into basketball in the city. I went to Resurrection Elementary on the west side of Chicago. So a lot of great players came from Resurrection Elementary. Most notable, Isaiah Lord Thomas III. And I always say Isaiah's full government name just because he's that real and he's that iconic for us West Siders out there. But I played at Gordon Tech High School, played 4 years at Southern Illinois University from 03 to 07. Made 4 NCAA tournaments, 4 Missouri Valley Conference championships. Man, I got the rings to prove it. I'm not going to do it, Drew, because I ain't trying to stun on everybody. But I got enough rings to pull off that famous Michael Jordan pose and picture where he's like leaning with his hands on his face with the rings on there. I could pull that off.
Yes, sir.
If I want to, but I'm not going to stunt like that. But for anybody out there that think it's sweet, the game for me is still intact, man. So that's my basketball history. And just being around the city, playing on the west side and south side, of course, everywhere across the city that I've just, experienced basketball and played against some of the best players in my era, man. So it's interesting enough that me and Drew are uniting on this thing because we actually played against each other in high school. I mentioned I went to Gordon Tech. So, Drew, give the people your background when it comes to this basketball thing in the city, man.
Man, so since you shouted out your elementary school, I got to do the same for Murray Language Academy in Hyde Park. After Murray went on to De La Salle, that's where, Cam and I first linked up, Chicago Catholic League represent. And that's kind of when my basketball kind of stopped. I ended up going to Southern Illinois University and watching the Salukis tradition between, Darren Brooks, Brian Turner, Jamal Tatum, like just like a cavalry of guys that just represented that town of Carbondale so well. I was very fortunate to be down there when you guys were just rocking it out and surprising people and shocking the nation. Had the chance to cover the team my junior and senior years, experienced like the conference tournament, Conference USA. So to be here with you, man, 2 Salukis, 2 Chicago born and bred brothers from the soil, like this is everything, man. I couldn't ask for nothing more.
Yeah, 100%, man. It's definitely something that's going to be a lot of fun and connecting with you, man. And just thinking about the names of Darren Brooks and Jamal Tatum and Stetson Harrison and Brian Mullins, who's an assistant coach for DePaul right now and former head coach of Southern Illinois University. Really great teammates, really great friends, but part of the main reason why I didn't get as much burn on the court because of those dudes, because they were that great, man. So if you don't know your history and your knowledge of those names that I just thrown out, then just go ahead and Google them because they were for sure legit at SIU. Okay, now we threw out the SIU connections, we threw out the Chicago Catholic League connections, but the one major connection that binds us are the Chicago Bulls. Yeah. As I mentioned, we're both from the city of Chicago, the real city of Chicago. We're not throwing out any suburban names out there, and this is no shade to anybody out there that's from the suburbs, but if you're claiming Chicago and you're from the suburbs, just be proud of where you're from. But we're not going to do that right now. But when you think about just those years, as I mentioned, especially in the 90s, with the Bulls, the championships, 6 championships that Michael Jordan led this team to. Of course, you can fast forward and go to the Derrick Rose years and just how dominant he was, right? And shout out to D Rose, who was recently retired, but the youngest MVP in NBA history. Yeah. What's the one moment for you, Drew, that stands out as a Bulls fan?
Man, the one moment, just because it's on the top of my head and showing love to another brother from the soil and Derrick Rose, I think kind of an underrated highlight of his is when they were playing in Miami against the Heatles, and he was coming down on the fast break, and he bumped Wade and then went up and under. LeBron banked it off the glass. Like, that's just, we think of D Rose and his athleticism, his explosiveness, but that move right there, like that under the rim, below the rim, hit you with the body, get you a nice little finger roll off the glass over 2 of, the best players in the game at that time. And of course, some consider LeBron James to be the greatest of all time. We ain't gonna get into that on this podcast.
We're not gonna do that. We're not gonna do that. We're not gonna do that. We're not gonna do that to Michael Jeffrey Jordan.
Not at all. Not at all.
Yeah, no, I feel you on that, man. I definitely remember that. It was one of those moments for D Rose where just not even just that play, but anytime he faces the Heat, especially in the playoffs, he was a guy that wanted to just make sure that the Bulls brand and the Bulls name was known when it came to facing off against that Miami Heat team, right? I mean, D Rose carried the flag for not only the Bulls, but the city of Chicago, and where a lot of us are from and played ball. So that moment is seeing one of our own go up against one of the greatest of all time, and also a fellow Chicagoan and Dwayne Wade, and really just go at them with no fear and just playing the way that D Rose, we all know how he plays. It was special, man. So I'm with you on that. But I'm going to go back to the 90s. I mean, for me, and I'm sure for a lot of people from Chicago, even if you're not from Chicago, if you're a Bulls fan or you just remember basketball during this time in the 90s, you got to go back to the Jordan years, man. And so for me, I'm thinking about not the second three-peat, but I'm looking back at the first three-peat, because it all set itself up in 91. With Michael Jordan against Magic Johnson and the Los Angeles Lakers, and just Michael finally getting over that hump, because we remember the years of the Detroit Pistons, of them coming up short and really just getting their butt whooped on physically and also on the scoreboard sometimes as well. But to see Michael Jordan in that moment to win his first ever NBA championship and also holding that trophy, just embracing it like it was a family member, and his late father, James Jordan, right there with him, sharing in that moment. It was so special for a lot of Chicagoans. As I mentioned, like with Derrick Rose, how he carried the flag for Chicago in his time in that Bulls uniform. Michael Jordan, even though he isn't from the soil, he's from North Carolina, but still, he's always going to be a Chicagoan to us, because what he was able to do on that platform and putting the Bulls in that type of that stratosphere and universe of being an NBA champion spoke volumes, man. And it was off and running since then. So 5 championships later, you're talking about one of the more iconic franchises, if not the iconic franchise in the NBA. I know Boston and the Lakers, they had their titles, but still Chicago and this franchise of the Bulls is right there, man. So that's what stands out to me. And just being in the city and seeing the city really implode, sometimes literally, depending on where you were, because there was a lot of extracurricular activities going on. Yeah. And I believe the statute of limitations has since passed. Not to say that was involved in any of the stuff that was going on in terms of the celebration back in 91 for the championship, but you just saw a city just really enjoy being on the front pages of the basketball world and really just on center stage of the basketball world. So it was really special, man. So I love your moment. I, of course, love mine. And I know a lot of Bulls fans can hit us at CHSN on Twitter or Instagram and DM us or DM me and Drew. You got our handles right there, and tell us about your favorite moment as Bulls fans in this iconic franchise's history. Okay, Drew. So speaking of the past, let's look at the present and look at the 24-25 Bulls. But also remember that By the Horns is presented by Toyota, and Toyota has more all-wheel drive and four-wheel drive vehicles than any other brand. You can find yours and shine on. Toyota, let's go places. All right, Drew, let's get into it. 24-25 Chicago Bulls coming off another run in the play-in last year. 39 wins for that team. We saw them in the United Center with that game against the Atlanta Hawks, and Kobe White having a really just cemented moment in his career in that Bulls uniform. And I know the NBA won't count it because it was a play-in game with that, but we're going to count that in Chicago. I even told Kobe that during media day that the 40 that he put up was special in so many different ways. I mean, the United Center was rocking. The next phase was the Miami Heat. Obviously, we know the history between the Bulls and the Heat and Jimmy Butler, former Chicago Bulls. So that ended the Bulls season. So a lot of change with this roster has gone on. Obviously, Zach LaVine missed a ton of time last year due to that foot injury. Eventually, he had to have foot surgery, so Zach only played 25 games. And then the Bulls front office decided to move off of Alex Caruso and traded him straight up for Josh Giddey of the Oklahoma City Thunder. And you kind of get that move a little bit, right? A little insurance at the point guard position because there was still hope that Lonzo Ball would return after the multiple knee surgeries on his left knee. And thank goodness he is progressing to the point where we will see Lonzo Ball at certain points throughout this season. He did immediately rule out back-to-back during media day that he would not be doing that. But this team has added some pieces, some new faces, but then also they have some veterans that they added to this roster to try and help this group go. So coming off of the offseason, Drew, how do you view this Bulls roster, the makeup of it, and how Billy Donovan will try and make this thing work?
Man, I view this roster as one that is kind of in flux, man. I see the vision, I think, of what AK and Mark Eversley want to do and where they may want to take this thing in the next coming years. They've even said it themselves that they're not done making changes. Obviously, there's a lot of talk about Zach LaVine and where he may end up, obviously, even though he kind of wanted to put that talk to bed and focus on the future. Like, that's still very much going to be a main storyline to this season. So this team is just a lot of competing priorities between Zach maybe wanting to show what he can do and that he's still that guy that can give you 25 points on efficient numbers. You've got an ascending Kobe White and Ayo Dosunmu who don't want to take a back seat to anybody. You know, they still want to prove that they are valuable pieces in this league. Obviously, you've got the rookie Matas Buzelis, not scared of anything seemingly. He wants all the smoke. Like, it's good to have
look,
all of it.
Every piece of the smoke. Like, Matas is not scared of nobody. I think if it's him and LeBron one-on-one, he's going to take himself and pick himself every single time.
Yeah.
That one-on-one matchup. Or even if it's Victor Wembanyama. Like, that dude mentally, and you love to see that though, right, Drew, for a young player to come in and believe in himself that much where you're like, wait a minute, you know you're still a rookie, right? I don't want you to get delusional on your expectations for yourself, but sitting down with him, he's a different type of dude in a good way that when you look at him and you view him as the future of this franchise, you want that mentally and physically with what he brings.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, especially with the iterations of this Bulls teams that we've seen, you know, the past few years. There hasn't been like a guy that just exudes that type of confidence, that type of belief in self, is not ashamed about it. Obviously, DeMar DeRozan did great things here, you know, potential Hall of Fame player, but it's just a different type of vibe that you get with Matas Buzelis. Again, somebody that Billy Donovan has praised because of his athleticism, his motor, his competitiveness. Like, he's going to push for playing time. And, you know, we're going to talk about this soon, but if that game we saw Tuesday night in Cleveland is any indication, he's going to force his way into that rotation. I think that's one of the best things that can happen for this Bulls team. There should be no reason why they should be, you know, trying to scratch for play-in tournament relevancy at the expense of his development being on the court, not just, you know, obviously off the court, him learning his body, his routines, just being an NBA player, but he needs to be in there, man. Like, this isn't a team that, you know, has much championship equity, if any at all. Like, we're trying to see this team get to that point where we can talk about them in that type of light. Like, he needs to be one of those pieces. I don't know how many guys on this team are going to be here, you know, when he signs his next contract. You know what I'm saying? So we got to figure out who's going to be here with him, what type of player he can grow into, what can he handle, what can he not, what he needs to go into next offseason working on. So, you know, this season is going to be an interesting one, but not necessarily in my mind in terms of how many wins they can get.
Right. I'm with you on that. I think when you have a group like this team, right, it was really constructed in the way that Billy Donovan wants to play. And we've heard Billy Donovan talk about this throughout the offseason and also on media day. And I sat down with him one-on-one, and he was saying that he wants an up-tempo type of pace. And when you have an athlete like Zach LaVine, who is back ready to prove, and he doesn't feel like he's a forgotten about player, but just he wants to send out a reminder to the rest of the NBA that he's still that cat at his position as one of the better scorers in the NBA, especially when you think about just how powerful he can get his buckets, right? I mean, I'm not just talking about through the air, but his efficiency and how he creates his shots and gets his shots. In shot clock situations, he's able to make plays for his team to bail them out in certain situations. So you have that. You have guys like Dalen Terry, like Julian Phillips. You talked about Ayo Dosunmu, who really glowed up from averaging 7 points to 17 points when you look at from January to the end of the season. So he's a young guy that's really trying to put himself in a position to be a leader with this group. And if you paid attention to what the Bulls are doing this offseason, it was Ayo Dosunmu, it was Kobe White, those two connecting and leading all-season workouts down in Miami for this team in preparation for training camp to build chemistry, because there's so many new faces with this group. A player like Josh Giddey, you talk about up-tempo style that Billy Donovan wants to play. The trade for Alex Caruso, straight up, one of the best defenders in the NBA. But again, you look at that situation and you understand it's about building for the future, right? And Alex Caruso was phenomenal in his time with the Chicago Bulls. Won the NBA's Hustle Award last year, as I mentioned, one of the better defenders in the NBA and also NBA champion. But you have to look at where this team is starting to go. And Josh Giddey is one of those guys as a younger player at 6'8", running that point guard position that can lead that fast break and get his teammates in positions to score and just make the game easier for them. So if you want to get up and down, those are the pieces that you're going to have in place. We talked about Kobe White a little bit, how he's ascending and really going to ascend even more this upcoming season, because I feel, Drew, that he's at this point where he could have won NBA's most improved. I mean, I believe if you and I had a vote, and this is no bias into it, but we would have gave Kobe White that love over Tyrese Maxey, who won that award for the Philadelphia 76ers last year. But it's Kobe's forward movement, right, that has everyone really hot with higher expectations with him. There's no backwards movement with Kobe now, because he's really seen what he can be in the NBA and how he can take over games. So you have shooting, you have athleticism, you have a point guard that can make it all go. And that's what I believe Billy Donovan is really hanging his hat on, that this team can get up and down, try to defend the perimeter. We're going to talk about that in a little bit when we look at the first preseason game against the Cleveland Cavaliers Tuesday night over in Cleveland at Rocket Mortgage Fieldhouse. But this is a team that wants to push the basketball in transition. They're one of the slower paced teams last year. I believe they're in the bottom 3 of that in the NBA. And this one is one of those situations where they really couldn't push the tempo as fast as they could, obviously with DeMar DeRozan on that court. And this is no knock or no shade to DeMar DeRozan, but that's just not his game. As great as he was in that Bulls uniform, it didn't allow the Bulls to really get out and run as much as they wanted to. Now, Debo is Debo, right? He's always going to be cemented in Chicago. And speaking of guys that should have won certain individual awards last year, Debo should have been Clutch Player of the Year over Steph Curry. Do the math, do the numbers. You'll understand what I'm saying with that one. But we got more to talk about with this Bulls team. So you look at the new faces, the new pieces, and finally we get to the first preseason game, Drew, of the 24-25 season for this Bulls team. Now, everybody watching, we understand it's just preseason game number 1. But there are some things that you can take from that game that give you a little pause for notice, like, okay, that was interesting. So it's not about the Bulls getting the win, which is great. I mean, winning is always great, which they did, but it's little individual things that you can take from certain players to put little stock in as the season gets a little closer. So your overall thoughts from what we saw in preseason game number 1, as I mentioned, the Bulls won 116 to 112. First half was a lot different from the second half, Drew, but overall, shooting the basketball from the perimeter, 4 of 23 in the first half. They finished 8 of 40 for the game, but it was the defense that turned up in the second half with a lot of those new faces, those younger guys that wanted to get after it.
Yeah, I'm going to pick up right where you left off, because that defense is probably the thing that stuck out the most. If I'm not looking at individual players, it might be worse than what we thought, Cam, like just based off of who we assume is going to start for Billy Donovan this year.
Yeah.
If it's going to be Josh and Zach and Kobe and Vooch and Pat, man, it's going to be a lot of open shots being taken by the opposing teams, I think. Wes Unseld and Billy Donovan have a lot of work ahead of them. They don't have any on-ball dogs, man. Like, guys work hard, but there's just certain limitations to this team. They don't have any on-ball defenders. Like, P. Will is the best defender of that group, but you're not really going to ask him to step out and guard, guards and shooting guards, maybe some wings, but where he has bulk and strength, he maybe lacks with the speed to guard some of those guys. So opposing teams are going to be drawing two, kicking out to the corners, getting open threes. So I know that Billy Donovan wanted to change the focus of the defense from protecting the paint to trying to do more to, eschew three-point shots. But with the way that this defense is looking, again, it's just one game, but the history of the players that's going to be in this starting group just does not jive well with a team that is going to put up, respectable defense. So that's the big thing that I took from the first preseason game, that first half in particular, where we saw the starters play most of those minutes.
Yeah, and you're thinking about the Cleveland Cavaliers starters, there's Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland and Evan Mobley, who has a big year ahead of himself because new head coach Kenny Atkinson stressed during media day in his introductory press conference that he wants Evan Mobley to really take that next step in his career offensively. And he signed a monster deal for himself, that rookie contract extension for himself. So there's a lot of faith and trust in him. And we saw some of that in him offensively doing some things. And you just think about that position alone, Drew, right? A young athletic forward in Evan Mobley. And you would think that Patrick Williams would be the guy that draws that assignment. But night in and night out, it's not just going to be one of those young athletic fours or seasoned fours. It's going to be multiple guys going at the Bulls. And so defensively, they have a lot of things to go back to the drawing board on. They have the film. I'm sure they're probably watching tape right now, Billy Donovan and his coaching staff, to figure out how they can make this defense work for them for the betterment of getting out in transition. And so that change of not protecting the rim as much. And I'm not going to say the Bulls are just going to have an Ole defense, like they're just letting everybody through to the paint and getting rim attacks, but more so the focus is going to be defending the perimeter, because if you can close out and contest and have rotations, especially when that ball is moving around the perimeter, you open yourself up for long rebounds to get out in transition to showcase those the athletes that they have. So it's a lot that goes into it. Again, I will continue to say this. It's just preseason game number one. I'm not talking to you, Drew. I'm not talking to you. I'm talking about everybody that's listening and watching us right now. But the hope is this team can continue to build to get better. Will there be some tough nights? Can't lie to you. I told you at the start of this By the Horns podcast presented by Toyota that we're going to give it to you real. We're going to have some real talk on this thing. We're not going to sugarcoat anything, but also at the same time, it's the same conversations, I'm sure, not in the same vocabulary or words being used by the Bulls coaching staff, two players, or the players, two players, but they ultimately want to do better so they can be competitive. And that was the theme of what we heard during Media Day, Drew, when we were there and listening to the players and the coaching staff. They want to be competitive. They're not trying to settle to be one of the worst teams in the Eastern Conference or the NBA. This team still has talent on this roster. And you talk about on-ball defenders. Ayo Dosunmu, in my opinion, is the best on-ball defender for this Bulls team. But he's in a different role coming off the bench for this group. So minutes-wise, it's going to be interesting to see how Billy Donovan divvies up those minutes with Josh Giddey, with Kobe White, who can slide over to the point guard position. And we saw some of that Tuesday night against the Cleveland Cavaliers. We know that Zach can initiate offense, of course, create offense for himself and sometimes others. But you're going to have a guy in Ayo that's going to be plugged in, to that spot in ball handling and making sure that he sets some type of tone on the perimeter defensively. So it's a lot of different things with this defense that needs to be improved, but you can't allow a team in Cleveland, and not to say that Cleveland is a bad offensive team, because as I mentioned, new head coach Kenny Atkinson, one of the best basketball minds that we have in the game, especially with his innovation offensively. If you need some more detail, then go back to when his time was in the Brooklyn Nets uniform, not uniform, but on the sidelines, how he was able to really help that team blow up and help lead them to the playoffs. So he's very innovative in that way. His last stop was with the Golden State Warriors, right, with Steve Kerr. And we know how the Warriors get down in terms of how they shoot the basketball and how they move the ball. So that Cleveland team nearly put up 70 points in that first half. So you can't get in those situations, Drew, down big, especially on the road. So it's a lot of basketball to be played, but still some things stand out to us on it.
It's just, they got to beat the allegations, man. They got to keep the allegations.
What's the allegations, Drew? What's the allegations?
That their defense is going to be bottom of the barrel this season, man, because of their personnel. Like you said, Ayo Dosunmu, very good on-ball defender, but he's kind of on an island by himself in terms of the guys we think are going to be in the rotation. Billy has talked about playing 10, going 10 deep, but who's in that 10 other than Ayo Dosunmu who's going to give you good on-ball defense? And then behind him, the rotation's got to be crisp. They got to be on target, and that's been a rather consistent problem for some of the people on this team, man. So it's going to be an uphill climb, and they're going to have to run fast to try to keep up, but it's going to be hard to run when you're taking the ball out the net every time. So something's going to have to give, man.
Yeah, very true. And also expending more energy because you're chasing on the scoreboard as well, trying to play the up-tempo style. So, again, a lot of question marks as we continue to move through the preseason and also get ready for the regular season with this Bulls team. So we talk about defense, right? And we touched on Matas Buzelis in terms of how he wants all the smoke. And that was really evident in the final seconds Tuesday night against the Cleveland Cavaliers. And this is a guy that already had a steal, had a block on Darius Garland, I believe, had double-digit points, some rebounds, a few assists to go in as well. But he took it as disrespect, Drew, because he was defending a screen and roll with Taylor Horton-Tucker, and Taylor Horton-Tucker was guarding Craig Porter Jr., reserve guard, point guard for the Cleveland Cavaliers, who was in his second year, saw some real minutes in the NBA last year as a rookie, averaged 12 minutes. So it's not like Craig Porter Jr. was a guy still trying to make the roster for the Cleveland Cavaliers. He's a guy that's going to be in their rotation off the bench. But the situation, if you saw it Tuesday night, I know I was watching, Drew, I know you were watching as well. When Craig Porter Jr. came off that ball screen, the switch happened with Taylor Horton-Tucker and Buzelis. Matas stepped up and he was ready for it, but Craig Porter Jr. did one of the more disrespectful things that you can do on a basketball court. Is he told everybody, clear out. In fact, Tristan Thompson was coming over to ball screen. He said, no. I got the young rook. I got him. And so Buzelis, again, who wants all the smoke, dug down, got in the stance, and was able to defend without fouling and forced Craig Porter Jr. into a desperation three. And Buzelis was able to contest that three without fouling. Craig Porter Jr. misses the shot. He was over 4 on the field that night, and the Bulls get their win. So that's the piece of defense, and that's the mentality that even though he's a rookie, and I'm not saying that Zach LaVine or Nikola Vucevic or Kobe White or Ayo Dosunmu are going to look to Matas Buzelis as a light in terms of leadership on the defensive end, but it's just the energy that he brings to the court. And we know energy is infectious, and if you see a young rook out there getting after it and wanting more, that puts another battery in your back and it helps you remind yourself that, look, if he's out here giving it his all, I got to do the same thing. But at the same time, you have to have your leaders do what we saw in preseason game number 1.
Absolutely, man. It's just he brought the type of energy to the game where he makes something positive happen. And we talked about that with Julian Phillips last season. On a grander scale, Alex Caruso the last 2 seasons. Like these guys, they just make things happen when they're on the court. Even Dalen Terry to an extent last season on the defensive end, doing what he does.
And he did look good in Cleveland. Dalen Terry had some good moments defensively and offensively.
He really did. But again, Buzelis, just doesn't play scared. To your point, I think him taking that as disrespect and guarding Porter Jr. on an island and not fouling, like I think, it's not Donovan Mitchell. We don't want to like blow this too far out of proportion, but I think there is something to be said about him doing that on an island and not fouling as a rookie. Like some guys may want to overthink the moment or do too much. Maybe try to block the shot, but he did a good job of staying in front, contesting without fouling, and the Bulls escaped with a victory.
Yeah, no doubt, man. No doubt. It's just the poise, I would say, in that moment for Matas Buzelis, right? But still a rookie. He's going to have his bumps. He's going to have his welcome to the NBA moments. He's going to have his learning curve. It's going to be a long season for him. But again, this is one of those pieces I was talking about, Drew, that you can take from the first preseason game and just put it into your memory bank. Like, okay, I saw this from Buzelis. We saw that he's unafraid. We saw that offensively he's athletic and really can get after things, has some nice moves, especially a floater in the lane that he had over Jared Allen. He had a nice turnaround on a reverse pivot shot. They got himself another bucket. So you just take those pieces from this team and understand that there's something there with the 11th overall pick from the June draft that we had this past summer. And even if you go rewind it back a little bit before that, he was being talked about as possibly being the number 1 overall pick before we got a lot closer to the draft. So again, it's those pieces that you can say that, all right, there's something there with Matas Buzelis, along with obviously Ayo Dosunmu, who was instant offense and also defense when he first came into the game for the Bulls. So you have pieces with this group that show what they can do. It's just about bringing it all together to make it work, especially on that defensive end, because you can't play around with fire in this NBA, man. You just can't do it. But again, we will make sure that we take this thing in small doses because it's still the preseason. We got 4 more to go. The Bulls are back in action this Saturday at the United Center against the Memphis Grizzlies. So hopefully we see another version defensively of this team with Memphis, because depending on what players are playing for the Memphis Grizzlies, I know Ja Morant is still dealing with that serious ankle injury that he suffered for the Grizzlies in the preseason. But still, there are some players like Jaren Jackson Jr. that still exist for the Grizzlies, like Desmond Bane that still exists for the Grizzlies. So they're coming with some offensive power that want to get themselves ready for the upcoming season. But look, that will do it for our first episode of By the Horns presented by Toyota. I'm Cam Smith. That's my man, Drew Stevens. Chicago, this is for you. We got a lot more coming your way. Stay tapped in with us.